Hello, everyone. Welcome to Sin Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment, give you my thoughts. If you're joining us live, super happy to have you. If at any point during the broadcast you have any questions or comments about any of the topics that I'm going to cover, feel free to drop them in the chat, the live chat. I'll do my best to kind of keep an eye on that as we kind of go along, see if we can kind of get like a conversation dialogue going. If you're watching this after the fact, again, super happy to have you. Please, if you haven't already, please, as is my obligation, to smash that subscribe button, hit the like button, hit the little bell notification, whatever you got to do. Really does help with engagement. Slowly but surely, we've been growing our audience, so super happy to kind of, again, continue to grow that, grow this community. Just a forewarning, I just was at a wedding this past weekend, so I had to kind of like rush to get all of this stuff done for tonight's broadcast. Also, you can kind of tell I have like kind of a sunburn all over my beautifully polished head. So I'm not nervous. So I'm not all red in the face. I just was out in the sun. Okay, let's talk about the box office from this past weekend. The total domestic total. $101 million for the weekend, and this actually amounts to a 4.7% jump. And I believe the weekend prior was also a jump. So again, we're moving into that summer season. It's definitely been a slow summer season. We'll get into that in just a second. But it has been growing a little bit, right? Opening at number 1 is Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. This is like the prequel to Mad Max Fury Road, the film from like a decade ago, and only bringing in about $26 million for the weekend. So I'm only looking at Friday through Sunday. I know technically it was a holiday weekend. I know a lot of places will look at, the long weekend numbers, but since I do this on Mondays, I'm really just going to try to look at like as if it was a normal weekend. But even just taking out, even considering that, this was a little bit of a disappointment. I had projected that this would make anywhere from 39 to 49 million for the weekend, and this is so definitely fell below. And I think I've been reading article after article, at least seeing the headlines for them, that this entire Memorial Day weekend, even including, again, that actual Memorial Day, actually including today, this is like one of the worst Memorial Day weekends for the American box office in like decades. So I'm not going to put the blame on Furiosa because, again, as we'll see, some other stuff kind of fell short as well. But again, compared to at least my projections of like 39 to 49 million, this is definitely below that. Again, also considering this was made for like $168 million. And it's only made about 59 million worldwide. So even bringing in the international box office here, again, it's like a third of its budget. So it still has a long way to go to break even. I have heard phenomenal things about this movie. I have not ever seen a Mad Max film. It's kind of something that I just have never gotten around to watching, and I would have gone to see this for review. But since there's so many other films in the franchise, I just don't really have like that time right now to do that. And you might be saying, but Peter, it's really just a prequel to Fury Road. Just watch Fury Road. I'm a completionist. I don't want to watch Fury Road until I watch the other Mad Max films. Also looking here at Garfield, the Garfield movie, not to be confused with lowercase t, lowercase m, the Garfield movie, as in Garfield from like when I was growing up. The Garfield movie coming in at number 2, bringing in about 25 million. So basically tied, it was like people weren't sure which was going to win out. So this brought in 25. This had a more humble projection of about like 31 to 40 million, but again, that still isn't it's still an underperforming, right? But also at the same time, a much lower budget. So this was made for maybe like a third of what Furiosa was made for. It was made for about 60 million. And this movie has made like a gajillion-ish dollars internationally. So its worldwide total is 98 million. So it seems to be playing very well outside of the United States. I'm not sure. I would have to confirm. I don't think it opened like weeks before in other countries. So I don't know if that's like this seems to be its opening weekend, international opening weekend number. So that's going to at least bring in a decent amount of money to the studio, but it's again still underperforming considering what people were expecting. Another movie opening this week is a more small film at number 7, Sight, bringing in only about 2.7 million. There's not really much to say about this. I'm going to predict right now this won't make it into the top 10 next week. It will drop out very quickly. In terms of films continuing this week, at number 3, we have If in its second weekend, only bringing in about 16 million. So if you remember from last week, that also kind of underperformed or like just barely made it into the projection. So it was definitely not a great, again, summer blockbustery movie. And it's dropped from first to third place in its second frame. And this was a 52% drop, which I anticipated. Again, because it has not been getting particularly great reviews. They're not awful by any means, but just kind of everyone's just saying it's fine. And considering the box office, results from last weekend, this is not surprising. This so far brings its domestic total to 64 million and its worldwide total to 104. Off of a $110 million budget. So again, there's still a bit of a way to go there to kind of break even on this. But it's interesting to see. Ryan Reynolds, I feel like Hollywood really likes Ryan Reynolds and just wants to keep trying to make Ryan Reynolds happen, and that was, and if you look at Ryan Reynolds' career, it's kind of done this kind of up and down kind of trajectory where he's like really hot and then he's kind of cools off and then he gets really hot again and then cools off. And I feel like now he's maybe like hot again in the sense of like he's in a lot of stuff, he's in a lot of big stuff, and then it just kind of doesn't perform well. I think people are kind of tired of like the Ryan Reynolds shtick, perhaps. I mean, I don't know if you can blame If's underperformance on Ryan Reynolds solely, but seeing as he is the primary live action character in that film, I think it's worth kind of looking at, is the Ryan Reynolds factor actually bringing it down when it's ostensibly a children's film, and the people who most like Ryan Reynolds' shtick are older men who like it when he's able to be really edgy and inappropriate and sardonic and things like that, right? Also continuing in their second weekend is The Strangers Chapter 1 at number 6, bringing in 5.6 million. It dropped from 3rd to 6th place in its second frame, and this constitutes also a 53% drop. So again, I also said this as well. This has not been getting good reviews, so I'm not surprised that this has dropped so much. But again, it was only made for $8.5 million. So, it's made about 23 million domestically, and then just a smidge more, 24 million worldwide. So this is easily made back its budget. So again, it's the classic horror movie business model. You make it for really cheap, even if it's not particularly great. Usually you can make on an X amount of, you can expect kind of like a base floor of like what it's going to make. And if you can keep the budget low enough, then it'll always be profitable, even if it doesn't really set the world on fire, so to speak, right? Also continuing in its second week, Back to Black. So this is a, huge, not disappointing to me, but just like a disappointment, if you're the ones who like made this film, right? Because last week it had a very, I don't want to say pathetic, that's kind of me, but kind of a very disappointing, very pitiful opening weekend. Definitely fell below projections. It's not been getting good reviews. So not only was it opened in 6th last weekend, it's now at 9th in its second frame. This was a 61% drop. This brings its domestic total to about 5.2 million domestically and 44 million worldwide. So as you can notice there, like I think it's been in England and other countries for like a couple weeks, if not more, by this point. So that worldwide box office is going to be primarily, the domestic total is really just a sliver of like the total pie here. But again, it's just, it's definitely has become a, I don't see this lasting I don't see this staying in the top 10 next week. But I mean, I could be wrong. Maybe something like Sight having a big drop, Back to Black will be able to kind of maybe at least maintain that 9th place spot or something. I don't know. But again, this is really just completely fizzled out. And then also continuing this week is number 10, Babes, a kind of comedy with Alana Glazer from Broad City, bringing about 1.06 million, and actually jumped from 10th to from 18th place to 10th place in its second week, and that's because it opened in just 12 theaters, and this weekend it's not quite wide. Technically, a wide release would be 600 theaters or more, but it went from 12 theaters to 590 theaters, right? So because of that, you have like a 550% jump. And this brings its domestic and worldwide total, because I don't think it's even opened outside the United States yet, if it's going to at all. It brings its total to about $1.5 million. So interesting to see this film again get that boost from going basically wide, but not technically. And it'll be interesting to see if maybe it can stay. But again, I don't see this being able to stay. Just a couple other notable things here. At number 4, we have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes bringing in $13 million. It dropped from 2nd to 4th place, now in its 3rd frame. A 48% drop. So this is definitely one of the bigger movies of the year so far. That's not necessarily saying much, but there have been a few big hits this year. This brings its domestic total to $127 million, and its worldwide total to $299 million off of a $160 million budget. So it's definitely getting close to basically breaking even. And if it can kind of have some legs as we go through the summer season, again, every amount of money is better than nothing. And maybe it may fall short of your expectations, but if you made $1, that's $1 more than you didn't, more than you had the day before, right? So I could definitely see this being like kind of a sleeper hit, maybe, or I'm completely wrong. Who's to say? So we also have The Fall Guy here in number 5 in the 5th place spot, bringing in $5.9 million for the weekend. Dropped from 4th to 5th place in its 4th frame, but still in the top 5. Because I remember we talked about that also did not open particularly strong. I believe, if my memory serves me right, it did fall within the projections, but just barely missed it. And then had a pretty big drop. And I know it's about to go to streaming very soon, or digital at least. And I know people have been complaining, there's a reason why the box office has been hurting is because basically during COVID, we trained audiences, just wait a couple of weeks. If you can wait a couple of weeks, it'll be on digital, and that's how most people would rather watch these movies anyway. So we'll see. I'm not sure when that's happening. It might be literally within the week or so. But again, this was only a 29% drop. So far it's made about $74 million domestically and $146 million worldwide. That's not awful, right? I think... and I guess you could lump me into this, but I've also, I've only been doing the show for a couple of months, and also I feel like I try to give, a full picture of the success of these films, but as a society, at least in the United States, in the industry, we really care about that opening weekend. But there have been plenty of instances of really, really financially successful movies that did not have good openings, and they just had a steady... performance over weeks and weeks, months and months, especially if you want to go back decades and decades when films were in theaters for months and months, right? So maybe the Fall Guys, it's one single Fall Guy, let's be clear. Maybe the Fall Guy will be able to kind of maintain enough momentum to just kind of slowly but surely build up that box office. And we saw that near the end of last year going into this year with films like Anyone But You, I feel like is a great example. The romantic comedy with Sydney Sweeney and Glenn Powell. I don't know if that opened super well, but just that film in general on paper should not have made as much money as it did, right? That was very, very successful financially. This movie, of course, is a lot more expensive than a film like that. But again, maybe there's an opportunity here for a film like this to kind of just slow and steady wins the race, right? One last thing I want to note here is Challengers at number 8, bringing in just a very humble $1.4 million. Dropped from 5th to 8th place in its 5th frame, so it's been over a month now since it came out. This constitutes about a 52% drop, so again, not great, but also at this point, it has been out for enough time that, again, I think everyone who really wanted to see it has gone to see it, unfortunately, which sucks because it's a really great movie. This brings its total to about $47 million domestically, $82 million worldwide off of a $55 million budget, which again isn't quite breaking even, and I'm going to predict that it doesn't do that. I don't know if it's going to have the legs to kind of get up to cross the century mark, as they say, get over 100 million. But I think this movie did exactly what it was set out to do, which is to be an art film, and be a showcase for a director and a showcase for the actor. So, I think this is not the end of the Challengers story. I think this could be a big awards contender. If it can't manage the box office momentum, maybe it can at least manage the critical acclaim momentum that it received when it first came out. Hold on, I'm sorry. Okay, let me just grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. So, this is not a huge story, but I think it's really interesting. if for nothing else, it raises questions that we as a society, particularly in the United States, have been going back and forth about for decades at this point. So the families of, not all of them, but like families of victims of the Uvalde school shooting are suing Meta and Activision for promoting firearm use to underage boys. So the lawsuit is claiming that they, quote, knowingly exposed the shooter to the weapon, conditioned him to see it as a solution to his problems, and trained him to use it, end quote. This lawsuit also notes that Call of Duty features, the AR-15, which was used in the shooting. The lawsuit was filed on behalf of around 45 family members. They are also suing Daniel Defense, which is the maker of the AR-15. And they claim that the shooter was, quote unquote, courted, on Instagram by both Activision and Daniel Defense, with Meta, basically turning a blind eye and facilitating that process of radicalization is the wrong word, but just like, putting this content out there in front of him. We have a quote here from Josh Koskoff, who's the attorney for the Uvalde family, saying, quote, companies like Instagram and Activision do more than just allow gun companies to reach consumers. They underwrite and mainstream violence to struggling adolescents. Instagram should stop enabling the marketing of AR-15s to kids by gun companies, and Activision should stop training and habituating kids to kill. It's that simple, end quote. And notably, Koskoff, the attorney, he previously won a $73 million settlement for the Sandy Hook families against the gun manufacturer Remington. So this may be able to, result in some kind of, success for these families, but that's really, that's still very much up in the air. So again, just for like a very quick context, as a reminder, so this all has to do with the Uvalde shooting. So back in May of 2022, an 18-year-old opened fire at Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, killing 21 people, many of whom were, like elementary age children. It was just an awful moment, and this really doesn't have to do with this story, but iconically, and I don't mean that in a good way, but just like famously or infamously, the police stood outside and were more worried about keeping people out than themselves going in to try to, neutralize the threat. And there was a lot of, questions about about getting justice from those police officers and how the police officers didn't do their job and this, that, the other thing. So it was a very, very big story when it happened, about 2 years now at this point, which feels like it happened yesterday. So what is the validity of these cases on a legal ground or an ethical ground? So, when it comes to the claims made against Activision, right, the makers of Call of Duty, the Call of Duty video game series, there is a precedent of lawsuits like this not succeeding, right? And video games, particularly, all media, but particularly video games, have been blamed for real-world gun violence forever, but especially since like Columbine. Video games were always being blamed for violence, like even going back to the early 90s, like pre-Columbine, with like fighting games like Mortal Kombat and things like that. But then especially, I think it was a report came out that the perpetrators at Columbine played, I forget what game it was. It may have been Doom. But had been playing these first-person shooters, FPSs, if you will. And people immediately jumped on saying like, well, that's why they did it, and video games are turning, our innocent children into mass murderers, and and it's been, 20 plus years. So what was that, 1999? So like almost 25 years at this point. I think exactly. It depends on when Columbine happened in the year. But basically, it's been a quarter of a century since that happened. And we're still kind of going back and forth. And if anything, those arguments have kind of stopped, because ultimately I think people realize that that's not the case, right? Because if that's the case, then you would see in all of these mass shooting events the same kind of scenario of them playing lots of violent video games, which doesn't always necessarily happen. And studies have shown that violent, quote unquote, violent video games may actually reduce real world violence, because it then becomes a safe outlet to work out aggression. So I'm not saying that in and of itself is healthy, because there's still now a root problem of this person's so angry that they need to simulate killing people so that they don't actually kill people. That's a whole other problem. But at the very least, it is then an opportunity to work out feelings of aggression in an environment where actual people are not getting harmed in any way. And also, just like, and this is like an anecdotal or like just a common sense analysis. I don't know if this would hold up legally or, scientifically when it comes to like actually looking at the data. But there are plenty of people, myself included, who play these games and they don't become mass shooters, right? So I think that argument has never held weight. That it's like that is a coincidence, and that if you like if those shooters didn't have access to those video games, I don't know if anything would have really been different, right? So that's kind of like the Activision side. So I'm always very skeptical when anyone's blaming real world gun violence on violent video games, right? On the other hand, the claims against Meta, I think, are a lot more salient, right? So, there is, legal precedent going back also to the 90s. What was the name of? I'm such a dunce. What's the name of it? There was a very iconic piece of legislation. I think it's like the Digital Copyright Act or something along these lines, and in the mid 90s. And basically, one of the provisions in it, Section 230, basically granted platforms. In the 90s, it would be websites, but it's been applied to social media companies like Facebook or Meta. Basically, Section 230 protects platforms like Instagram from civil lawsuits due to speech on its platform. Basically, it gives a website, think like a forum. Or, again, later now with Facebook, if someone posts something that is illegal, or not necessarily illegal, but if it's speech, like slander, you can't sue Instagram. You would have to sue the person that said those things in your civil lawsuit, right? It basically shields companies like Meta from such litigation, right? But The Verge notes that this could still be an issue due to the fact that, especially, a lot of people have argued that Section 230 should no longer apply to these websites because of how algorithmic they are. The idea was, okay, look, like, we shouldn't be held responsible for the speech on our platform because we're just giving them the platform. We are not responsible for that, right? In the same way that, and they've been able to get money from this, but like a gun manufacturer basically saying, we make a product, we can't dictate how people will use this product, right? But if these websites are so algorithmically powered, in the sense that does, because you are putting your thumb on the scale, so to speak. It is not just on the platform. You as Meta are actively working to put this content in front of people that you think will like it or click on it, most importantly, right? And you're getting money for that. Companies will pay you, and I know this because I've done advertising on Facebook, right? I pay, if I want to get something out there, I pay to boost a post, and I put in like what kind of people I want to target, and then Facebook will try to push it in front of those kinds of people, right? So essentially, people have been arguing if you're putting your thumb on the scale, you shouldn't have that immunity that you would get from Section 230. So how do I personally feel? If it hasn't been apparent. In terms of Activision's role, again, I think it's unfair. I don't know if games specifically, I don't know if it's a one-to-one violent games cause violence. And, Meta's role, like I said, I think is a lot more justifiable, and it's, speaks to just the larger issue of how social media has essentially ruined a generation, my generation, I guess, if you include me, definitely the generations that have come after me. But, I think overall, I don't know if this is even going to solve the problem. So if you watch this channel, I'm pretty far left, right? So, and I am very religious, and I am very much against guns in almost any respect. Just because they kind of reinforce a culture of violence in America that I think Michael Moore really beautifully portraitured, if that's a verb, in his documentary Bowling for Columbine. And it really is less about the specifics of Columbine and more about how America creates and then is affected by a culture of violence in our media, in the way we interact with one another. So ultimately, I think we should just have more gun restrictions. So more regulations on these essentially, weapons of mass violence, right? And So it's one of those things where it's like, do I think Call of Duty, it's a one-to-one because this kid played Call of Duty, that's what led to this horrible tragedy? No. Unequivocally, no. But what does it say about our culture that Call of Duty is one of the most popular games? And that FPSs, first-person shooters, are one of, if not the most popular video game genre? What does that say about our society? Right? That is the case. So I think to try to make Activision or Call of Duty or FPS as a scapegoat misses the point. And ultimately, it always comes down to money. That no gun companies, Activision, Meta, they're not doing any of this because they want people to die. That's not why they're doing it. They do these things because it will make them money. It's less immoral, more amoral, which in some ways is maybe even worse. That is like you just detach from the effects of the things that you do and the products you create and the content you create. So, whether or not, however this plays out is how it's going to play out. But, anything that will scare these companies to pull back from or divest from the culture of violence that we've created and stop trying to benefit from it, the more anything that will scare companies to do that, the better. More of that, the better, in my personal opinion. So it'll be interesting to see how this case plays out. Legally, I don't think it's gonna go anywhere. Maybe we'll end up in a settlement, like with the Sandy Hook families in Remington. But only time will tell. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Let's keep the political train going off of that. Okay. So, let me just jump right in, and then I'll explain the context, because you might not know what this is about, because this is technically about a film that has not been released yet. If you're like me and you follow this stuff, you've known about this film, but a lot of you watching may not even know this film exists now, right? So, the film The Apprentice is facing potential legal trouble following its Cannes premiere. And yes, it is Cannes, it's not Cannes, it's Cannes, as the French would say. So, but what is this film? What is The Apprentice? So, it's a film that was directed by Iranian filmmaker Ali Abbasi. And the log line describes it as, quote, a story about the origins of a system featuring larger-than-life characters and set in a world of power and ambition, end quote. And I think the logline continues to go on saying, quote, the film delves into a profound exploration of the ascent of an American dynasty. It meticulously charts the genesis of a, quote, zero-sum culture, one that accentuates the dichotomy between winners and losers, the dynamics between the mighty and the vulnerable, and the intricate psychology of persona, end quote. So, all of that to say, that's all like the thematic stuff. But what is the film like just like on its face about? So, the film follows Donald Trump, you may have heard of him, follows Donald Trump's early years in like the New York real estate world under the tutelage of Roy Cohn. And if you don't know who Roy Cohn is, he was, a very prominent figure in the 20th century when it came to law and just like politics and things like that. He was the chief counsel for, during the McCarthy hearings of the Red Scare in the 50s. He became a prominent political fixture in New York City in the 70s and 80s, and he was also a closeted gay man, and so he died from AIDS in 1986. And he's featured in the play and then the subsequent HBO TV miniseries, Angels in America, played wonderfully by Al Pacino. It's a really great series. I recommend you go watch it. It's a really great role, and Al Pacino does a really great job. In this film, it's Jeremy Strong on the left here. You see in this picture up on the right. Playing Roy Cohn with Sebastian Stan, aka Bucky from the MCU, playing a young Donald Trump. So you might be wondering, so like, what kind of film is this, right? So I think even without having seen it, or even before knowing anything about it, I think just everything I've just described, it's gonna be decidedly unflattering, right? It is not necessarily painting a rosy picture of either man, but especially Donald Trump, which is obviously of more importance since, Donald Trump is not only still alive, but was our 45th president and could very well become our 47th president. And it features many scenes not flattering to Trump, and I think it includes like him like basically getting like cosmetic surgery, like, to improve his physical appearance. And it does include a scene where he rapes his first wife, Ivana. This is they didn't just make this up for the movie necessarily. She had claimed this during a divorce deposition. She later, though, recanted the statement in 2015, saying, quote, "The story is totally without merit. Donald and I are the best of friends and together have raised 3 children that we love and are very proud of." So then that, though, raises the question, well, why did you say it then? And so there's one of two scenarios. Either she just said it then just to try to discredit him, and then eventually was just like, no, it's, we put water under the bridge. Or, 2015 seems suspiciously close to the beginning of the 2016 election, so maybe the Trump team kind of worked something out with her to, can you please, do something. I'm not saying, necessarily they paid her off or something, but, basically worked out some agreement for her to kind of try to tie up all of their potential loose ends ahead of the 2016 election. But this film has been in the works for years. Investors in the film have come and gone. One financier dropped out after January 6th. Another one dropped out after Ivana's death. So, it's been something that has taken some time to actually get off the ground. And it just premiered at Cannes, right? I think it was this past week. And it's gotten mixed reviews, mostly positive, but not necessarily stellar reviews, despite an 8-minute standing ovation. But at Cannes, that means nothing. Every movie just gets a 12-minute standing ovation, and then every review will be this is the worst piece of garbage ever. So I don't go off of the length of the standing ovations at Cannes anymore. But the film is going to be, facing some legal trouble. From 2 main sources, and maybe we'll continue after we do the story and in the weeks to follow. So, one potential source of legal trouble is an investor in the film, Dan Snyder. He was the former owner of the Washington Commanders. He famously did not want to change the name from the Redskins to something else, which kind of gives you a sense of maybe his political, predispositions. And Vulture also notes that, during his time owning the Washington, at the time, Redskins, notes that there were allegations of mismanagement and sexual misconduct. So not necessarily an upstanding fellow, but I'm sure he would say it's all, liberal propaganda. He's also, as you can imagine, a friend of Donald Trump, and he's been a major donor of his previous campaigns. He invested in this film, though, through his production company, Kinematics, so Cinemax, but with a K. Because he, for some reason, I'm not sure what the filmmakers told him. I don't know if they lied or he was just dumb. He thought this would be a flattering film to Trump. He thought it would be something that, Trump fans could watch and enjoy. And reportedly, he saw a cut of this film in February and was, I don't want to say understandably, but as you can imagine, from his point of view, he was furious. He's been trying to get multiple aspects of the film changed before its release, or at least its premiere in Cannes. The problem, though, for him is that Kinemax does not own the copyright at all. He's an investor, but that does not give him any rights when it comes to, canceling the film or changing anything, so he really doesn't have anything, he can really do about the content of the film. So that was going to be the story. I remember reading that, and that was going to just be the story. But now Donald Trump himself has commented on the matter, and his team has revealed that they will be filing a lawsuit to, quote, address the blatantly false assertions from these pretend filmmakers, end quote. We have another quote here from Stephen Chung, who's the Trump campaign's chief spokesperson, saying, quote, this is a S-tier level quote. This is hilarious. So, this garbage is pure fiction, which sensationalizes lies that have been long debunked. As with the illegal Biden trials, this is election interference by Hollywood elites who know that President Trump will retake the White House and beat their candidate of choice because nothing they have done has worked, end quote. He also goes on saying, quote, this film, in quotes, is pure malicious defamation, should not see the light of day, and this is my favorite part, and doesn't even deserve a place in the straight-to-DVD section of a bargain bin at a soon-to-be-closed discount movie store. It belongs in a dumpster fire, end quote. So very, very, very strong words from the Trump team. Deadline notes, though, that, this is definitely part of Trump's not only Trump's playbook, but, the idea of basically suing any detractor is right out of Cohen's playbook. Again, and that's the whole point of the movie is that Trump was basically this, because it's called The Apprentice, which of course was the name of Trump's famous reality show on, I think it was NBC. This has nothing to do with that show, and it very much is looking at Trump as if he is the apprentice of Cohen, that Trump is basically carries the mantle or carries the torch of Cohn's outlook on politics and power, right? And similar to Cohn, with Trump, most of these suits are either retracted or they fizzle out or they go to court and they just lose. So it's who's to say what's going to happen with this, but official cease and desist letters have been sent by the Trump campaign. So what's the filmmaker's response to this? Ali Abbasi has made it very clear, saying, quote, "It's time to make movies political again," end quote. I'm kind of with him as well. I'll read his quote in just a second, but, I think this is somewhat of a tangent, but I think this is relevant. People are always saying, "Oh, I hate when when they make movies political," whatever. Usually the people who say that, and you're probably either watching this live or you're going to be watching this later, and I'm going to get comments about this, which all of them fine for me because I like the engagement, so that's fine for me. But, it's mostly people saying that are mostly going to be people who have not necessarily experienced much prejudice in their life. So to them, people like them is just the default. And they've never had to wrestle with being othered. So when they see something that does not feature people like them, they now feel othered. And go, well, now it's got political. When people say they're not political, what they really mean is that their politics is the status quo. There's no such thing as being apolitical. Because nothing is default. When it comes to at least transient human political machinations, right? Laws of gravity are eternal. But not politics, right? So I'm very much in agreement with him that it's like, you should make films. Every movie is political. It just might not seem political to you because you just take the things in it for granted, right? The LA Times notes that, he's even offering Trump the chance to see the film. He's not necessarily trying to be antagonistic, necessarily. Including a rape scene is maybe a little bit antagonistic, but... we have a quote from Abbasi saying, quote, "I don't necessarily think that this is a movie he would dislike. I don't necessarily think he would like it. I think he would be surprised, And like I've said before, I would offer to go and meet him wherever he wants and talk about the context of the movie, have a screening, and have a chat afterwards if that's interesting to anyone at the Trump campaign," end quote. He also goes on to say, quote, "This is not really a movie about Donald Trump. This is a movie about a system and the way the system works, and the way the system is built, and the way the power runs through this system," end quote. And I think this is the perfect answer that he could have given. It's in good faith, but it doesn't acquiesce or try to say, try to give Trump any credit. It's just saying, like, look, it's a movie. We're using Trump as a cipher to explore something larger about American society. If he's interested, I'd love to talk to him about the movie to kind of give him at least my kind of perspective on the situation and go from there. Right? We also have a quote here, which is a lot more strong. Not necessarily, not that it's not in good faith, but it's definitely not pulling any punches. The quote here from Jeremy Strong, who, again, actor who's playing Roy Cohn in the film, saying, quote, "An enemy of the people," which is what Trump says all the time, "an enemy of the people is a phrase that has been used by Stalin, by Mao, by Goebbels, and most recently by Donald Trump, when he denounced the free press and called CNN, NBC, ABC, CBS, and the New York Times fake news media. We're living in a world where truth is under assault, and in America, that assault on truth in many ways began during Donald Trump's apprenticeship under Roy Cohn. Cohn was called an assault specialist by the National Law Journal, and at this perilous moment in history, we are experiencing Roy Cohn's long, dark shadow. His legacy of lies, of outright denialism, of manipulation, of flagrant disregard for the truth has reached a terrible culmination," end quote. I think that, again, doesn't really hold any punches, but I think that's a really salient perspective there. Again, this idea that Trump is a manifestation of Roy Cohn's outlook, like I was saying, on politics and power. And so we're still dealing with that, wrestling with that, even though the dude's been dead for almost 40 years now. But this is obviously going to get a lot more attention because if open up your iPhone or your Android or whatever phone you use and open your calendar and look what year it is. It's 2024. Quite possibly the most important election, which is what they say for every election. But elections are important. You should all go vote. I don't care if you vote third party or 12th party, go vote. But this is obviously going to be crucial heading into the election season. They are looking for a U.S. distributor for the film, something that could kind of create some obstacles to get it distributed across the country. Your Variety notes that Kinematics, they don't have the copyright to the film. They can't decide what's in the film, but they do, supposedly part of their deal, they do have some leverage or power in the sales negotiations, which could delay the release, right? And this film, if it's released and released wide, and a lot of people go to see it, it could hurt Trump's image with women. And it's hard because Trump always defies our expectations, both what he does and then also what the effect of what he does is going to be. I remember the prevailing consensus after the Access Hollywood tape right before the 2016 election was that it's all over for Trump, and he won pretty handily, at least in electoral college terms, right? Obviously not the popular vote. So it's been a very surprising set of basically a decade at this point, almost, of what Trump can do and have people still support him, right? And one of those groups is like the quote unquote women for Trump. I think that has been hurt with all of these cases regarding Trump's, at best, kind of sleazy relationship with women, and then as far as like the E. Jean Carroll case of him being found guilty of essentially rape of E. Jean Carroll, and then having to pay her money because he was like slandering her, saying she was like lying and stuff. But there still are women. But I think as more and more things come out, if these women for Trump see this film, whether it happened or didn't happen, and I would like to, I think that this assault with Ivana Trump probably happened or something like it. Because again, why would she say it under oath, only to recant it later, not under oath, right before he goes into an election? That just seems very convenient timing. But regardless of the historicity of this event, I can't imagine a woman watching this scene. And if even if just a part of her believes that this may have happened, any woman still supporting him may struggle to stomach that violence that up to this point is a talking point and not something that's visual and visceral, that they're actually seeing happen before their eyes, even if it's on a screen. So this could be very, very important for the election upcoming now. Not that long from now, about 6 months from now. Or it could mean absolutely nothing. Who, again, the Trump era, who knows? Let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. Let's talk about story number 3. The Justice Department of the American variety, along with 29 states and the District of Columbia, are planning to sue Live Nation Entertainment for illegally maintaining a monopoly. Luckily, Vulture, the publication, has outlined essentially their 5 key arguments in a nice bulleted list. So I'm going to read you those 5 key arguments and kind of explain a little bit more detail. So essentially, the DOJ is basically arguing that 1, Live Nation has a monopoly on primary ticketing markets. 2, Ticketmaster's long-term deals with venues represent exclusive dealing, which is a big no-no. Number 3, Live Nation has established a tying arrangement by requiring artists performing in Live Nation venues to use Live Nation as a promoter. Number 4, Live Nation has a monopoly on large amphitheaters. And number 5, Live Nation has monopolies on concert promotion for both venues and artists. So essentially, in layman's terms, the argument here is that Live Nation has been able to solidify its power through Ticketmaster's exclusive ticketing contracts, right? Also holds dominance over concert tours and venue management, and this all amounted to creating an illegal monopoly that raised prices, limited innovation, and stifled competition, right? The lawsuit also claims that they colluded with a fellow venue management company, Oakview Group, which suspiciously was co-founded by the former executive chairman of Live Nation. I wonder what that could possibly mean. I'm just going to quote from the Hollywood Reporter here. They basically summed it up, and there really was no better way to reword this. So here's what the Hollywood Reporter had to say about this. In 2016, Live Nation chief executive Michael Rapino emailed Oakview Group, which offered to promote an artist Live Nation formerly worked with, warning that such competition would lead to artists demanding more compensation, according to the complaint. He wrote, quote, "What's up? We have done his touring in Vegas. Let's make sure we don't let the artist agency now start playing us off," end quote, the lawsuit says. After the exchange, Oakview Group withdrew its bid. So you can see that there is this colluding, which again is a no-no. So like there is such a thing as not just monopoly, but duopoly. If competitors in an industry collude with one another to keep prices high, to make sure that things always go their way, that can be grounds for antitrust regulation. And this effort to kind of, break Live Nation's hold on the live event industry and potentially even break it all up is fairly bipartisan. It's not necessarily one side or the other is thinking this. The NPR notes that the House of Representatives actually recently just passed what they call the Ticket Act. And of course, Ticket probably stands for something. I'm not looking up the acronym. I refuse to give them the pleasure of me looking up their dumb acronyms. But they passed this law, the Ticket Act, to force ticket sellers like Ticketmaster to list all costs and fees within a live event ticket. And this was passed in the House, and it was introduced in the Senate recently by Ted Cruz, right? So again, a Republican. So it's a very strange group of bedfellows, right? So Live Nation's reaction to this lawsuit, obviously they were not happy with this. Here's a quote here, official statement here. Quote, the DOJ's lawsuit won't solve the issues fans care about relating to ticket prices, service fees, and access to in-demand shows. Calling Ticketmaster a monopoly may be a PR win for the DOJ in the short term, but it will lose in court because it ignores the basic economics of live entertainment, such as the fact that the bulk of service fees go to venues and that competition has steadily eroded Ticketmaster's market share and profit margin, end quote. So their argument is basically like, look, we do have competition. Our profit margin has been hurt by this competition, Why are you coming after little old us, right? And they do make an interesting point that, they argue that they don't set the ticket prices, right? Artists do and venues do, right? This wasn't necessarily in response to that statement, but artists in general have, complained about Ticketmaster and Live Nation. And, a group of artists, including Billie Eilish, notably, released a joint statement saying, quote, we are joining together to say that the current system is broken. Predatory resellers and secondary platforms engage in deceptive ticketing practices to inflate ticket prices and deprive fans of the chance to see their favorite artists at a fair price, end quote. So what's going on here? So Live Nation Entertainment is like the overarching umbrella corporation that technically owned. It was the product of a merger between Ticketmaster and Live Nation. So these are huge, companies in their own right. But then by being together, they are then able to kind of leverage each other's access and strengths to create more and more of a closed system that benefits the overall corporation. So, and these are huge companies. So the New York Times notes that Ticketmaster sells around 600 million tickets a year to events around the world. And some reports estimate that the company handles ticketing for 70 to 80% of major American concert venues. Axios also notes that Live Nation directly manages more than 400 artists. You can start to see some potentially illegal cross synergies going on there, right? So again, Ticketmaster and Live Nation, so it's, both, this company is doing both ticket sales to concerts that they themselves are promoting. So the tours are promoted by So it was basically found that tours that were promoted by Live Nation were more likely to play venues where Ticketmaster was the exclusive ticketing option. Oftentimes these artists were only playing at places where the only way you could get a ticket was to get through Ticketmaster. You can use SeatGeek or the venue's own proprietary ticketing option. You had to get through Ticketmaster. And oftentimes Live Nation artists played venues which the company owned, because they also own theaters, like I said. So there's a lot of, they have their, I think the lawsuit even used the phrase tentacles. They have their tentacles spread out everywhere. This all came to a head with the Eras Tour, Taylor Swift's Eras Tour. If you remember, the pre-sale went up to buy tickets, but because of like a glitch in the system, because again, they don't really need to innovate or make sure that, they don't have a lot of competition. So the issue with monopolies is not always that prices are too high. Sometimes it just means what you're getting is not very good quality, and there's not a lot of room for innovation. It stifles innovation. So an example here is that the Ticketmaster website and app kind of just completely shit the bed, and it left millions of people unable to buy tickets, right? And if there's anything that can galvanize society, it's Taylor Swift, right? Swifties, and lawmakers a lot of lawmakers have children, and a lot of them are daughters, and they love Taylor Swift. So it's gonna get a lot more attention. And of course, the Eras Tour went on to be like one of, if not the most successful concert tour of all time. So obviously this is of great interest to a lot of people. So this is just a great example of the antitrust regulations and litigation that we have in this country. So a lot of these rules and laws were put in place during the Gilded Age of like the late 19th century and if you want to count going into the early 20th century, these were put in place to combat the rapid domination of corporations. So never before in human history were corporations able to get so big so quickly, basically killing off any competition. And they were very strong legislation that completely changed the trajectory of big business in the United States, right? But a lot of this has not been updated, right? Obviously, there have been new laws passed or updates or just policies, but, ultimately, the DOJ is using century-old laws to fight modern problems. So, never before were companies able to get so big so quickly. But now in 2024, companies are able to get way more bigger than they could in 1885 or whatever it was, right? And again, the American government, whether it be Democrats or Republicans, have been much more lax on prosecuting antitrust or monopoly cases in like the neoliberal, kind of post-Reagan era where, kind of trying, not quite laissez-faire, but trying to give the market as much breathing room as possible, rather than being kind of the first mover, right? But recent lawsuits point to some kind of sea change. Just like how the Gilded Age was followed by the New Deal era, I've been saying since I was in high school in like the 2010s that we've been living through, a second Gilded Age or a neo-Gilded Age. So it would stand to reason that we would then kind of also have a similar trajectory of, finally kind of taking charge and dealing with these issues. So just within the Biden administration, so like the past couple of years, they've been a lot more aggressive about preventing monopolies or breaking up monopolies. So it sued Apple in March. It's brought 2 cases against Google. The FTC filed an antitrust suit against Amazon. They're pursuing another one against Meta. They stopped the merger between Penguin and Random House, which itself was the result of a merger. Stopped a merger between Penguin, Random House, and Simon & Schuster. So they've been a lot more aggressive than they had been for like decades, right? The Department of Justice had allowed this merger between Live Nation and Ticketmaster back in 2010, but under certain conditions. And it was then found, though, in 2019, less than a decade later, that Live Nation had violated these terms, right? So the DOJ began investigating this in earnest in 2022. And of course, Live Nation, because essentially political bribery is legal as long as it's a corporation, Live Nation actively lobbied and, doubling its lobbying spend to like $2.5 million, trying to convince lawmakers to protect them, essentially. So here's the question: is doing all of this, would this solve the problem? Dean Budnick, who's the author of the book Ticketmasters: The Rise of the Concert Industry and How the Public Got Scalped, doesn't think so. So the DOJ lawsuit doesn't offer a compelling solution, and he says, quote, "Let's just say Ticketmaster and Live Nation were split. The first question would be how well capitalized Ticketmaster would be on its own, because the reason that it's able to do everything that's alleged is because it is so well capitalized. It can offer bonuses, advances against service fees, and all of that. If Ticketmaster became an independent entity but can pay for those contracts, then I don't know much will necessarily change." Again, the way I kind of feel about this is that, again, I don't think splitting this up would necessarily lower ticket prices, because again, that's often set by the artists and the venues if they're not owned by Live Nation. But again, such a breakup would force ticket sellers to improve their service, like we were saying. So you wouldn't have issues like the Eras Tour, and there would be more incentive to combat the issue of ticket resellers and scalping and things like that, because it's like, well, if SeatGeek is being more proactive about it, well, now that's a potential threat to our business. We should get in on that. We should be more proactive about that. So ultimately, I'm always, gonna side on things being too, broken up, essentially, if it gets too big. But, again, it's an open question of like what the effect would be if you actually broke it up. Okay, let me grab a quick drink. I also just noticed, I'm not sure when you posted this, but we have a comment from Spencer Twitty. Wow, 4 concurrent viewers? Yes, so I don't always have a lot of concurrent viewers at the same time. Sometimes, I think once we almost got up to like 9 or 10, but, so if you're watching this, send it to your friends, quickly, see if we can get up to 5 concurrent viewers. But, well, let me grab a drink quick. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So Alec Baldwin has lost his bid to dismiss the involuntary manslaughter case that he's a part of. His lawyers tried to argue for the dismissal. Prosecutors, they basically argued that during the grand jury indictment, prosecutors withheld information or evidence from the grand jury that would have, exonerated Baldwin. They also claimed that the instructions to the jury was inaccurate, and they also argued that some of the witness testimonies that people gave conflicted with those people's testimonies in the trial of the armorer on the Rust film, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed. So that there's there's contradictions in their statements, and ultimately they shouldn't be used as like the primary, motivations to indict. Ultimately, though, the New Mexico District Court Judge Mary Mark, that's a lot of indictments, grand jury returns an indictment absent a showing of prosecutorial bad faith, end quote. So basically the argument is the prosecution did everything they were supposed to do, and it doesn't seem like they did anything willfully with any kind of willful malicious intent. So Baldwin, for better or for worse, he's not happy about this. He's still on track to go on trial in July, and he faces 18 months in prison. So again, this is all in the context of the involuntary manslaughter that he was charged with in the death of Helena Hutchins when he was on the set for the film Rust in 2021 in New Mexico. Kind of like this Western, really low budget Western film, and he accidentally shot her with a prop gun, fatally injuring her. He's pleaded not guilty for a couple of reasons. Number one, his argument is that as an actor, he's not in charge of set safety. He had no reason to suspect that there was a live round in the gun. He claims even that someone shouted "cold gun" on set when he was handed the gun. So, meaning that it's a safe gun, as safe as a gun can be, even with a blank. And Baldwin also, his team released a statement saying, quote, "Hutchins, like Baldwin, clearly believed that the gun was cold." So I'm going to interrupt this quote because I believe Baldwin claims that, she was directing him. Point the gun towards the camera, So his team said, quote, "Hutchins, like Baldwin, clearly believed that the gun was cold. Had there been any doubts between them, she would not have instructed him to point the gun in her direction, and he would not have done so," end quote. He also argues he did not pull the trigger, which forensics has contradicted. I think they did some forensics, and the results basically said that this would not have been able to discharge had he not squeezed the trigger. So I don't believe he's lying. I believe that he believes what he's saying, but chances are maybe he just kind of squeezed it a little too tightly and that went off. Ultimately, I've done a couple of videos about this, on my channel, which about the trial for, again, Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who was the armorer. Her defense kind of argued that she was like a scapegoat for the whole thing. And so I've talked about this before, but my kind of take on this whole situation is I'm in agreement with Baldwin in the sense that I do not believe he as the actor is responsible, right? Again, he was told it's a cold gun. There was never any plan. No one would even need to say it's a cold gun because there was never any plan for there to be a live round. No one is quite sure how a live round got in there. He had no reason to believe that it was not his job to let me open it up and make sure. That would not be his job. But I do believe he is responsible, if not as the actor, as the producer, because he was also a producer on this film. And oftentimes when things like this happen on a film set, it's often because producers are trying to cut corners to save money, and it ultimately created unsafe working conditions. There is evidence that was used in the trial. I don't think it's been publicly released, but videos of Baldwin in between takes rushing the crew, again, because time is money. And also Baldwin is a infamous prima donna, right? It's definitely one of those kind of actors. So, I don't think he's responsible as an actor, but as a producer who created this unsafe work environment, I think he's 100% responsible. Now, I don't know if that creates a legal issue where because they're charging him as because of he was the one who pulled the trigger. I think honestly he would be on I think he should be on trial even if it was a different actor who did it, because again he's the one that created the problem, not exclusively, but definitely again created the conditions for something downstream to happen, for a tragedy to happen downstream. Okay, let me take just one more quick drink here. Okay. Sorry. Just whacked my microphone. Okay. Let's talk about story number 5. So Vivek Ramaswamy has bought an activist stake in BuzzFeed. So if you're not sure what that means, an activist stake is basically when you buy a substantial amount of shares in a company with the express intent of using that influence that having those shares gives you to change the direction or the trajectory of the company, usually because you feel like the company has the potential to be worth a lot more, but due to poor management or poor decision making, it has struggled, right? So Ramaswamy has control of about $4 million worth of shares, and it's equivalent to about 8% of all of the shares available. And the SEC filing says, quote, the reporting person, being Ramaswamy, believes the securities of the issuer, BuzzFeed, are undervalued and represent an attractive investment opportunity, end quote. And Wall Street seems to like this because the share price jumped about 50% upon announcement during, I think, pre-morning trading. So just a brief overview of the parties here, right? So if you're not sure, if you don't know who Ramaswamy is, he's become famous in the past, I would say 6 months or so, or whenever they did the first Republican debates. He's an entrepreneur. He founded a biotech company and then launched a quote unquote anti-woke investment firm. So you can kind of get a sense of where he's coming from. He ran for the Republican nomination for this 2024 election season. He dropped out after finishing fourth place in Iowa. And then later went on to endorse Donald Trump. And a lot of people knew he would not go anywhere. When he was ever on the debate stage, he was very flattering of Trump. So a lot of people felt at least me, felt like he was it was really more of an audition to be vice president. Which would be really helpful for Trump because if he has a lot of money, that could help him with his legal troubles and funding the campaign and things like that. So that's kind of Ramaswamy's deal. But it's interesting to see just where BuzzFeed has gone, right? So what BuzzFeed was huge when I was coming of age, when I was a teenager in the 2010s, very influential website, really famous for quizzes, listicles, the top 10 greatest bean recipes, things like that, and just general articles on pop culture. Often it focused on viral content or tracking viral content, and a lot of times I feel like they didn't invent it, but BuzzFeed perfected clickbait. The format of clickbait that we understand today, I feel like BuzzFeed, if not created, perfected, right? To the point where Clickhole was created, which is basically The Onion, but making fun of things like BuzzFeed, making just fake clickbait articles. That's hilarious. I wonder if Clickhole still makes... I haven't seen them. That's a throwback, Clickhole. The Wrap notes that the company, has struggled financially since it went public in 2021. Famously, it recently shuttered or basically neutered its news division, which was a Pulitzer Prize-winning news organization. It had Complex, was a media company. It sold Complex for about $109 million recently. It laid off about 16% of its workforce. And the Hollywood Reporter notes that they've moved to a model that's focused a lot more on creators and AI-driven games, quizzes, and more. So again, really trying to tap into that original zeitgeisty business model of really trying to just tap into what people might want to see, as opposed to creating stuff just basically following the trend as opposed to setting the conversation. Interestingly, though, after this announcement of Ramaswamy buying all these shares, the Comcast-owned NBC Universal then sold 61% of its remaining shares. This amounts to a little more than $10 million worth of shares. It had originally invested about $400 million in 2015 and 2016. And they've been slowly kind of pulling that money out of the company. Variety notes that they also sold about $28 million worth of shares earlier this year, which brought, basically they before that had about almost more than a quarter of all of the BuzzFeed shares. This brought it down to 15%. And now, due to this sale, brings their ownership of the company, or at least of the shares, from 15% to closer to more like 6%. But it's not evidently clear why Comcast did this. I thought maybe they must not like this news of Ramaswamy getting involved in trying to change the trajectory of BuzzFeed. But also, some people have noted it might just be a lot more simple than that. They just want to take advantage of that increased stock price. Again, it did go up like 50% after Ramaswamy, after this was announced. So they could very well have just been like, let's just make some money off of this. But it raises interesting questions again about what is the future of BuzzFeed. A spokesperson from BuzzFeed said, quote, "BuzzFeed is purposely structured to protect its editorial integrity. We are always open to hearing ideas from our shareholders," end quote. And again, activist investors can be really helpful for a company. He ended up losing the fight in terms of actually getting seats on the board. But the Disney proxy fight, I think, helped Disney because it forced them to not be complacent, right? That companies can get really complacent if they're on top for too long, and it sometimes takes someone, even if they have the wrong idea, both they either have the wrong interpretation of the situation of the company, or they have the right interpretation, but then their solutions would not be good. At very least, it forces the company to kind of put more energy into innovating, put more energy into actively trying to make the company better, as opposed to just kind of like resting on your laurels, right? But again, BuzzFeed, I don't know what Ramaswamy hasn't indicated. What exactly is his point of view on it? Like, what does he think BuzzFeed is not doing or isn't doing well, and what would he do differently? And again, maybe I'm reading into it, and I'm maybe making this too political. But again, Ramaswamy again is very much a culture warrior, right? Again, he founded that anti-woke investment firm. So this site was huge with Facebook. Again, like when I was growing up in the 2010s as a teenager. But now Facebook's user base is increasingly older. So perhaps Ramaswamy is like, BuzzFeed is trying to cling to a younger demographic, but BuzzFeed is best suited for a place like Facebook, but young people aren't really on Facebook as much. So perhaps could this lead to a conservative clickbait powerhouse? Could BuzzFeed's kind of general voice and vision skew more centrist or conservative to appeal to that? Because again, Facebook is the best, because not all social medias are built the same. They have different strengths and weaknesses. Facebook and BuzzFeed work really well together. They have a very complementary relationship in terms of their business models and what content does really well on Facebook and what's the best way for people to find content from BuzzFeed. But if young people aren't on Facebook, and BuzzFeed wouldn't necessarily really work super well on any other platform, maybe Ramaswamy's feeling that we need to cater to the audience that is still on Facebook. But again, this is not a super huge story, but I just thought it's interesting again to see kind of the transformation of this, what was once at least a very influential media company. So that wraps up the show because there's not really any like big movies coming out next week, so I'm going to forego the box office projections. Just want to kind of give a few quick shout outs. I have another YouTube channel called Peter Squared where I cover topics related to film, media, entertainment in a more formal video essay format. The video up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, taking a look at what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between, using these two versions of like an older and younger. How do I get my thumbs to be right? This older and younger version. What is going on? Did everyone just see that? I put thumbs up, and it created fireworks. I've never seen that before. I don't think I have any filters or anything. That's very strange. Anyway, go check out that YouTube channel. It is. I really would be. I'm just like cool about that. Can I make it happen again? Can I? No, only one. Yeah, there we go. That's incredible. Anyway, go check it out, that YouTube channel. It really would be a huge help. I literally have no idea how that just happened. I don't think I have anything set up on OBS to do that. Also want to give a quick shout out to podcast me and my fiance Viviana do called Now That's What I Call a Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. This season we're doing the Addams Family. We just released our episode on the 1991 Addams Family film. Highly recommend you go check it out. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts, as you can see here. You can also find it on YouTube if that's more your speed. You can find the link for that in the description below. Also want to give a quick shout out to Cinnamon Cuso. It is not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I write more formal written reviews for new movies coming out every week. I've been kind of taking a break right now because I had my friend's wedding and his bachelor party the week before, and then my fiance Viviana's graduation next week. So I haven't been doing many reviews in the past couple of weeks, but I'm hoping to kind of get back into the swing of things. You can find all my old reviews for basically the past 2 years of major film releases. So definitely, if you could go check that out, that really would be a huge help to the channel and the community. You can find that in the link below, or you can also just go to your browser and type in cinnamoncuso.substack.com. That's it for this week's Notes on the News. I'm Pierre Mancuso. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to like this live stream and share it with your friends. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It really would be a huge help. Thank you so much. Have a good rest of your week. I'll talk to you guys next Monday. Peace out.